Right then, hello, my name is Dawn Clarke. I'm the Lettings Director at Nock Deighton, and as this Facebook group is primarily for landlords, potential landlords and investors, I thought it would be useful to invite Ben Beadle, who's the CEO of the National Residential Landlords Association, to come along for a chat and to share views of many landlords across the country and to give everyone an idea of what his thoughts are on the future of the private rented sector. So, hello, Ben.
Hi Dawn, hi, thanks for the invitation.
Thank you very much for joining us. If we may have some people watching live, but obviously this will be available on the Facebook group for people to watch afterwards in their own time, and we'll be able to sort of share it on other channels as well.
Splendid.
So, firstly, can you explain exactly what is the main purpose of the National Residential Landlords Association?
Yeah, sure. So we represent almost 90,000 landlords across England and Wales. We're primarily a campaigning and lobbying organisation to make sure that the views of landlords are heard in Cardiff Bay and in Westminster. But we do much more than just that. So we provide an advice line. We're a membership organisation. So we provide advice, legal documents, links to partners and suppliers that offer our members a discounted rate to some of the best products that are out there. And we also do things like training and regional meetings and information events and so forth. So and all that for 75 quid.
Wow, that's a bargain. So you've been Chief Executive of the NRLA for just over a year now?
Yes, that's right.
What does the main part of your role entail then?
Well, it's a good question. Probably a lot of people will ask the same. I was brought in originally, people may or may not know, but the NRLA is sort of the love child of two former organisations, the RLA and the NLA, and it was my job to bring those two organisations together. We had a well-documented delay to that merger, and that merger took place on the 31st of March this year. So the first 6 months was really about preparing the organisation for that merger and dealing with all of the shenanigans that need to be dealt with as part of that process. And then it's about bringing the people together and bringing the membership proposition together, because of course NLA did it one way, RLA did it another way. What's the NRLA way? So there's lots of different things that we've had to grasp. But essentially, my role is to make it all work and to make sure that we offer a really great service to landlords, because frankly, landlords need us right now. Landlords are going through the mill. Some will argue, and I would argue, that landlords have been going through the mill long before COVID reared its ugly head. And we're there to provide as much support as we can to those landlords, as well as to make sure that the voices of landlords are heard loud and clear by policymakers. So that's a big element of my role.
Right, yes, very, very useful though. And since the pandemic started, then how have things changed for you and for the group?
Well, the slightly sad thing is, obviously lockdown hit us mid-March roughly. So we've got two groups of people that haven't actually met each other yet in terms of the organisation, or not met each other face to face for obvious reasons. So this is how the whole business is working at the moment, how people are communicating. We're providing our advice services from home. So there was a big planning thing from my perspective. We actually sent our people home in early March, preempting that it was going to be mandated on us. And we did that because frankly, we wanted to test and make sure that everything was going to work and that we were going to have business as usual, and save the odd child walking in on a webinar or a little bit of background noise. We've managed to do that, but it's been really interesting because the demand for our service has absolutely gone through the roof. So even in the run up to Christmas, we're getting in excess of 2,000 calls a week from landlords. At the height of the pandemic, we were looking at 3,500, 4,000 calls a week. A lot of concern from landlords about how things are panning out. I guess the most concern has been around the knee-jerk way things have happened. You will probably recall every bloody Friday there was a new announcement quite late in the evening, and whilst I understand the emergency nature of things, some of it was a bit disappointing in terms of the way it was announced and how it was announced and the tone in which it was announced. But put that to one side, landlords haven't been able to evict their tenants. They haven't been able to get decent access to court services, and the biggest role that we can play in the sector is, this isn't about evicting tenants, because landlords, I'm very firmly of the view, will only evict tenants if they have a pretty good reason to evict. Right, they don't just do it on a whim. And that's the point that we've been making to ministers. So actually, if you want to solve the problem around evictions and affordability, and I'm afraid we still haven't seen the worst of it yet, then you need to look at the financial support. You need to look at the support that the sector is getting. And we've been I've had several conversations with the minister on this front, and I understand that the measures that have been taken so far are unprecedented. We've got local housing allowance at 30%. We've got a whole range of things that are designed to put money in people's pockets, and broadly we think that's a good way of going about trying to maintain the status quo. But unfortunately, it isn't enough. The pause on evictions has real knock-on effects for landlords. 94% of properties in the UK are owned by an individual. Typically, about 45% of those people only have one property, and dialing back on some of the rhetoric that exists around landlords has been very, very difficult. We're not all driving around the Caribbean in our Maseratis and living the high life, sadly. Nice. Yeah, chance to be a fine thing. Actually, a lot of landlords are relying on that money to pay for their own living costs and their pension and a whole range of things. So we mustn't think that somehow landlords have got massively broad shoulders just because they have an asset that they can't even liquidate, they can't even get access to in any meaningful way at the moment. So there's been, that was a long-winded answer to your question, but that's been very much our focus at the moment, as well as trying to take the heat out of the conversation that somehow landlords are really bad people and just want to evict. That's all they're interested in. No, that's absolutely not the case. But landlords must have the right to get their asset back if you've got a tenant that won't pay. I'm less fussed about a tenant that can't pay, because I think that the benefit system and other measures will, and with a bit of goodwill on the part of landlords, which I'm sure you've seen, Dawn, we've certainly seen, I think people can get by. But if you want to stop mass scale homelessness, then I do think that greater funding for the sector is absolutely key. Yeah, definitely. It's been such a change for us and our staff within our departments as well, really sort of dealing with these inquiries that are coming through, and also really trying to deal with the number of tenants that have contacted us. And like you say, there's a can't pay and there's a won't pay, and there's a difference between the two there. So it does really make a difference to try and sort of get to the bottom of the reasons beforehand, because like you say, landlords can be very sympathetic and can certainly help when it comes to tenants who are struggling. But it needs to sort of go both ways as well, doesn't it? It absolutely does. And I think I would go so far as to say that, I think landlords have actually done, by and large, an amazing job. And that reflects, in my view, the high level of satisfaction that exists in the private rented sector. I know there will be other organisations that will tell you to the contrary, and yes, there will be some rotten stories around the edges, but we have to make policy based on the majority, not necessarily the extremes of what we see. And I think that we have seen plenty of landlords that have written off rent because they're able to, and that's great. They've also been able to, where they can't write off, they've come up with payment plans to defer some of that rent, and they've done that against a backdrop of no measures for themselves. The only measure, and I hesitate to call it a measure, is a mortgage deferment scheme. Absolutely not a holiday, because that sends totally the wrong message. But landlords have the right to defer some of their mortgage to 6 months down the line. Whoopie do. So it's a help, and it will help some people, but again, in the rhetoric, it's about, well, the landlords don't have to pay their mortgage, so why should I have to pay my rent? No, that's absolutely not right. And we've all got a responsibility during this time to be very, very careful with our words, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And have you got any sort of numbers or any percentages of how many landlords you've found that have actually suffered financial loss from their residential investment properties over this last sort of 8-10 months?
As an estimate, we think that landlords have lost somewhere in the region of about £400 million, a significant sum of money. Now that will have, some landlords will be able to bear the losses, some landlords won't. The bit that I'm really concerned about now is I'm very, very concerned about those landlords who already had their court order before COVID, but who haven't been able to enforce it in a meaningful way since. Now, we have been successful in part at getting some exceptions to bailiff enforcement, and that does include egregious rent arrears, but the test is really, really high. So you've got to have 9 months of post 23rd of March rent arrears before you can take any effect. So if you had 8 months before that, you still have to accrue a further 9 to get to that point. So in the worst case scenario, landlords could be carrying debts of 17 months, and that to me, doesn't seem terribly fair. No, to put it mildly.
Well, that's it. It's absolutely unbearable, isn't it? Really.
And I think that what we're seeing now is, I gave evidence at a select committee yesterday that was looking at the impacts of COVID on the sector. I honestly think there's a view that, and I don't criticise the government for this. They have tried to support the sector through furlough and universal credit and lots of other initiatives. But I do think they're of the view now that enough's enough and there's no more. And obviously you and I both know that if you want to sustain homes further, if you want to prevent landlords from having to exercise their right to evict because they have no other option, then supporting tenants to pay their rent needs to happen. There needs to be a bit more support for that to happen, and that's why we're advocating tenant saver loans. We've been successful at getting that just across the border from where you are in Wales, but we do think, and they've got it in Scotland as well, so England is very much the poor relation on this. Where a tenancy can be sustained, I think the tenant saver loan will offer people some breathing space, and it will enable people to get the security they need. That will have direct payment to the landlord to make sure that the rent is paid, and that should result in a relinquishing of any notice that may well be there. But that will allow tenants to be able to catch up and meet their obligations. But there's no sign of it coming here in England.
So how would that tenant saver loan actually work then?
So in Wales, the way that it works is it's administered by local credit unions, and it's a low interest, I think 1%. But at the moment, there are some exclusions. So you can't take advantage of that if you are already in receipt of benefits, because the idea is that obviously those measures in terms of local housing allowance and some tweaks there, that should be sufficient. Now obviously rents vary depending whereabouts they are in the country. So if you've got benefits and you're currently in Wales, then you're not able to access that loan scheme. But one of the things that we're looking at the moment, because the scheme is still in its infancy, is we are looking at access and we're looking at the applications, and we're basically asking awkward questions around the take up of that scheme. It was an 8 million, I think it was an £8 million pot, and we just don't know enough at the moment. But we do know there are some barriers in the way that might prevent people from accessing it. A lot of people, Dawn, ask me why we're not asking for specific landlord measures in relation to government assistance. And I think the reason, we won't turn any help away, that's for sure. But I do think there is some logic in recognising that the rent is the tenant's obligation to pay. And secondly, in order to facilitate that, any measures to enable rent to be able to be paid ought to be the responsibility of the tenant. So actually funding tenants to be able to meet their obligations, whether it's through furlough, whether it's through local housing allowance or other types of things, seems to me to be a really sensible way to do it. We just like a little bit more of it. The other side of the coin is that ought to go hand in hand with a more efficient court system. Now we've been looking quite long term at the moment with the Renters Reform Bill. We want to see dramatic improvements to the way the courts operate, but essentially not supporting tenants to pay their rent and not letting landlords evict in the most serious of cases is not a satisfactory outcome for us.
Yeah.
Because you're just passing the problem to landlords and tenants and saying, sort it out yourself. And what happens? Well, landlords get accused of harassment. Landlords want their property back because they're in dire straits because they've got a won't pay tenant. There's good and bad of both sorts in this world. And if you've got a won't pay tenant, then there does, I'm afraid, need to be a quid pro quo that landlords get their property back quickly.
Absolutely.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah, it is. And are you finding then that some landlords are actually deciding to sell their investment properties as a result of the problems that they're facing now?
Well, I don't think that we haven't seen it in any meaningful way at the moment, but I think it's too early to tell, frankly. Landlords may well be precluded from selling because they can't get possession of their property, or the tenants won't allow viewings or whatever. I think one thing's for sure, that the confidence in the sector is through the floor, frankly. I think there is a lot of concern, and what I try and say to people is that I know we haven't seen anything like this in my lifetime, but in any type of investment that you make, you get the peaks and the troughs, don't you? And what I hope is that, given that landlords are in this generally for the longer term, that the longer you leave it, frankly, the less of an impact it becomes. But of course, there will be landlords who think, well, bugger this for a game of soldiers. It's more hassle than it's worth, and I understand that viewpoint. The counter argument to that is, assuming you've got a reasonable yield, then you're probably not going to get that sort of investment in a bank anytime soon. So yes, it's annoying. Yes, the backdrop is uncertain, but for the most part, actually, dare I say it, we're even seeing people buy, plunge into investment as well. So I don't think we are seeing any meaningful exit from the market over and above what we normally see. I think we're probably seeing a different type of investor. A more ballsy investor, and somebody that doesn't necessarily come with the baggage of what it used to be like 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's really mirroring what we're finding as well, Ben, because obviously landlords that might have sort of bought an investment property for the first time a year ago are seeing this as something that's just really hit them hard, and obviously totally unexpected for everybody, of course, but they're now thinking, well, they've got to give their tenants 6 months notice to bring the tenancy to an end, or like you say, with regards to the court cases and everything being on hold that way, and it's just been such a shock to new landlords, whereas I think landlords who have had investments for a longer period of time are sort of seeing it and thinking, right, okay, we'll ride this storm, and like you say, there's peaks and troughs, isn't there? So
Indeed.
we're also finding that that again, we're getting new landlords that are still looking to invest in property, because that
Yes.
it does seem to be still a good place to put your money despite everything else.
I mean, you're absolutely right, and what we have seen is a really strong membership growth for the new organisation, where I mean, and it is from actually people that have seen what we've been doing and thinking they need to be a part of it, and also people that are, whether or not they're coming into a property investment blind, I don't know, or whether they're making an active decision, but we are seeing new investors entering the market and looking to join as a result of that. Whether I would invest in this market is another matter, but there are obviously ballsier people out there than I. But I'm interested to see that you're seeing the same sort of thing. And the other side of the coin to this with investment is that, dare I say it, there will be some opportunities to invest further, I suspect, as this recession plays out and as the jobs market changes dramatically, but also as people change their habits around their working and living environment. One of the funny things that we have seen, I say funny, not really funny, but different things that we've seen is, like rents coming down in London, where or certain parts of London where people don't actually need to be there anymore, and actually they can be out in the countryside, or they can be in zone 6 where I am, and commute in or work like we're doing at the moment on a webinar or an internet connection. And I think that's probably going to be the biggest risk to people for the longer term, is all of a sudden you think you're in an established market and then it's not there anymore.
Yeah, well, that's it, because people's needs and everything's changing, isn't it? So
it is. I mean, if you've got a property with a garden at the moment, then that's going to attract a premium. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. So dare I say, now that we can hopefully start to look ahead to a healthier future, what would you say that landlords have to look forward to for 2021?
Well, I don't know that landlords have a great deal to look forward to. I think there will be things coming down the track that landlords will need to be prepared for, and that will inevitably be greater regulation. The Renters Reform Bill will make an appearance in 2021. Where the government wants to reset the balance between landlords and tenants. We know that they have committed to the abolition of Section 21. We know that they have committed to landlords joining a redress scheme. We know that they've committed to a lifetime deposit, where a tenant can move their deposit from one landlord or one agent to another. Those are things we know are going to happen. And what we have been setting out in the past couple of weeks is what that Section 20 no Section 21 environment looks like, because it's all well and good to talk about Section 21 going, but what's going to replace it? Because what the housing minister has said to me, and he's said in the House, is that he will be strengthening the possession rights of good landlords. Quite right too. And you and I both know the myths that exist around Section 21. I think there are a lot of individuals out there that think, we just, willy-nilly throw Section 21s around like confetti. And obviously that couldn't be further from the truth. That Section 21 is pretty much the default way that landlords get possession of their property. They don't have to give a reason, but invariably there is one. They're not required to provide one. So from this perspective, I'm slightly more relaxed about Section 21 going, because I know that the government have to permit landlords to evict their tenants where there's serious rent arrears, or where they need to move back in, or where they wish to sell the property, or where there's antisocial behaviour. Well, if you've got those four, plus a few more technical ones around the edges, then if you're a serious landlord, you shouldn't have anything to worry about.
No.
And that's exactly what we've set out in our manifesto for the Renters Reform Bill. Specific timeframes attached to those, including a focus on conciliation, using the notice period to try and resolve whatever the fault is. But once you've gone through that process, having it expedited by the court so that there's no faffing around, a better court process and a more streamlined court process to make sure that landlords can get possession of their properties back. That's one element. I think there's a lot of scaremongering out there about Section 21, and a lot of landlords feel a great deal of attachment to it. But I'm much more focused around the new look of possession and leading the discussion about that, rather than harking back to what we once had.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, the Section 21, it's been around since 1988, hasn't it? And before that, everyone remembers, well, those of us who are old enough remember.
Not you, obviously, Dawn.
not me, I just heard about it. But before that, it was always a case of, nobody would ever think about renting their property out unless it was forever, because you just cannot get your property back, and that was the sort of the myth before that, wasn't it? And so
it was.
Everyone now thinks, Section 21, if that's going, it's going to revert back to pre-1988.
And we still have some Rent Act tenancies around.
Yeah.
And we mustn't forget about that. And they are difficult to get possession of the property back. But look at the wider housing sector. The PRS is bigger than social housing. There's no more. There's no significant building of homes really happening. It's landlords that are providing those homes, rightly or wrongly. I know there's a school of thought that all landlords should be converted into sort of social landlords, and properties sold off and given to housing associations and so forth. But frankly, that's never going to happen.
No.
If landlords don't have confidence in the system to be able to get their property back, then I'm afraid we will be even further up that well-known creek with zero paddles, because this is the way that the government is discharging effectively its housing provision through landlords. So I'm all for a greater supply of affordable homes. I'm all for that. I've no problem with that. I think there's plenty to go round, and landlords shouldn't worry about that unnecessarily. But the government and the housing market are very dependent on the private rented sector. And they will continue to be so, because we're a very agile bunch, and actually we do a bloody good job.
Yeah, that's it. And the thing is, the demand is there. I mean, if the properties weren't there, we'd be in a lot of trouble, because we have so much demand, a constant demand for rental properties, whether it's for short-term, long-term, or whatever. So, we need the properties there. We need the landlords to keep investing, and we need them there to be able to house tenants who are looking. And they don't necessarily want to buy straight away. They may not be in a position to, or it might not be in their sort of short-term plans to buy anything. So we do need those properties there. We need that market to keep going.
Agreed. Totally agree. And I think, to be fair, I think the government does recognise this. Sometimes they've got a funny way of showing it by the way that they treat landlords. And there is a certain cooling of the investment through Section 24 and mortgage interest relief, and the general battering of landlords. But people are still investing in the market. People still see it as being an option. if you've been in the market for 15, 20 years, I can well imagine that you fall into that category of, you know, looking back with fondness of the market conditions of 10 or 15 years ago. But unfortunately, the Renters Reform Bill will change that. I still think the rewards are going to be there, but they won't be as plentiful as they once were.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so with all, there's been so much legislation, hasn't there, introduced over the years, and I think a lot of it has really been introduced over the last 5 years, and a lot of it is there, and it's a necessity. It's there for a purpose, and it's there to protect tenants and to keep properties safe and to keep the tenants safe. But to somebody who is thinking about becoming a landlord for the first time, what advice would you be able to give?
So check your tax position. Check how much money it could cost you if you are a certain type of taxpayer. So it's all well and good to look at, you know, what you put in and what you get back, but the fiscal environment is such at the moment that you could be running at a loss and not necessarily realizing it, because, you know, you're on, I don't know, you earn just below the 40% threshold or the 45% threshold, and so you end up paying as an individual a lot of tax on your money that basically makes it not terribly worthwhile. So one of the things I would suggest, over and above joining the NRLA, obviously, is to check your tax position before, and to do a little bit of forecasting before you take the plunge, because actually I think that the rest of it you can get by on either with a good agent or with some support from us through your membership. You know, you can keep the right side of the law, but what we can't do is we can't predict what your tax is going to be. So actually spending a few £100 talking to a tax expert with and running a few modelling scenarios probably would be money well spent.
Absolutely, that's fantastic advice for that. Thank you. So that leads me on to my next question, which is about capital gains tax. We've managed to sort of dodge it this year, but there's obviously proposed changes to capital gains tax next year. Are you sort of hearing from landlords now that they're you know, making decisions to sell rental properties or portfolios because of proposed changes and increases in tax?
Again, not on any significant scale, but there is obviously a lot of chatter out there, and it doesn't take an expert to work out that we're hemorrhaging, you know, a shed load of money by the day in our response to COVID, and at some point in the future we're going to have to pay that back. You know, nobody is going to want to contribute anymore, but the reality is we're all going to have to contribute a bit more. We're probably all going to have to work a little bit longer, and it's going to be a little bit of a miserable existence until things are more readily sorted. The one thing, I mean, obviously, you know, capital gains tax would be fairly disastrous, but there's no point in me saying, oh, well, you know, poor old landlords, they've been through the mill. Actually, it's about, with all of these things, it's about looking at the knock-on effects that increased taxation will bring, and that it could include higher rents, it could include a lack of supply, which in turn means higher rents. It could mean a general lack of confidence in the sector where people do exit. The point is that I do think the private rented sector contributes far more widely to the economy than others give it credit for. And so we will be working through methodically some of the things that we believe it brings through research, where we have a research partner that we're going to be working with on this, where we're going to be looking at you know, if you tweak this and what the tax environment should look like, because there can be no doubt we're going to have to pay for this somehow, but you know, landlords have been contributing a huge amount, and so I'd much rather focus on, you know, people that aren't paying, or the Amazons of this world that pay 25p, rather than individual landlords who are providing good quality accommodation to people that need it, frankly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're holding a webinar next month, actually. So we've got a tax advisor giving a sort of a review or sort of on the proposals for next year as well. So yeah, it's good advice really to start looking at sort of taxes. And like you say, it's inevitable. Taxes are going to rise. We've got to pay back this huge debt somehow. So
and what's the fairest and most equitable way to do that? That's the question.
Yeah, exactly.
And you mentioned about a tax webinar. We did one on Friday with Ernst & Young, which I think is available for download from the NRLA website. But we attracted 2,000 sign-ups to that to that webinar, and there's obviously a big appetite for landlords that want to understand not just the nuts and bolts of what you're doing, but whether or not they've got their portfolio structured in the right type of way, whether it's the most tax efficient structure, a limited liability partnership, or whatever it happens to be. But I do think that is, they say that there's only two things certain in life, one's death and one's taxes. So landlords do need to get a grip of their tax environment, particularly if they're investing, but we all need to think about what that environment could and should look like as we seek to repay some of this money that we are spending.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so my final question is with regards to, or the final subject is with regards to the minimum EPC rating that's proposed for the future, because I know that there's currently a consultation in place proposing to reduce this further from an E to a C rating for all rental properties or new lets from April 2025, and I think it's relets and existing tenancies from April 2028.
Correct.
What advice are you able to give to landlords regarding this?
Look at the green homes grants that are out there at the moment. Frankly, we spoke with the Energy Minister Kwasi Kwarteng last month. Very nice chap, but there's obviously a direction of travel here. We've seen announcement in recent days around emissions and gas boilers and all of that sort of stuff. Yeah. There is a direction of travel towards more energy efficient homes. We could argue the toss over whether it should be 2030 or 2025 or whether it should be a D, and that's dancing around our handbags. The point is, greater energy efficient homes is the direction of travel. There's a grant scheme out at the moment with £5,000 up for grabs. Even if you are an E, well, make avail of this grant scheme. There's details on the NRLA website about how you can go about that, but get ahead of the game. There's some free money there. It doesn't happen very often. You might as well have a piece of it. Yeah, definitely. I've been reading up on that as well, and they're saying that it's fabric first as well, aren't they? They're sort of pushing that to say that it's there's, I think there's an A list and a B list, isn't there, for the green you've got primary measures and secondary measures, and you can't get to the good secondary measures until you've done the rather crappy primary ones, which is invariably cavity wall insulation, loft insulation, and a few other bits and pieces. The feedback that we're getting is that there aren't enough providers in order to fulfill demand. So we've been pleased it's been extended to March 2022. So people have got, I think, about 15 months to deal with that. But my properties are D, so they're fine for now. But again, thinking about the longer term, I'm going to be trying to take advantage of some of these grants myself, so I can be ready. Because that, as an investor, that's what you want. You want certainty. And although we can argue the toss about whether there's a couple of years extra wait or whether it, what it should be, there is a clear global commitment to want to deal better with emissions, and the private rented stock is a sitting duck with that regard after phasing out diesel cars and all of that jazz. So I just think it's something we need to get ahead of the game on as landlords. So look at the Green Homes grants.
Yeah, and I think what the difficulty I'm having at the moment is trying to find sort of companies or organisations that are able to sort of give that direct advice as to, if you do this, this will be the result. But I think hopefully as time goes on over the next sort of year or so, we'll be able to sort of see more of those sort of organisations come out and to be able to sort of help landlords directly to sort of tell them exactly what they need to do in order to improve the rating and to help them get those grants through as well.
Absolutely. I mean, there will be some difficulties if you've got period properties and so forth. And I think that's where the focus is going to be in terms of our responding to that consultation. There will be some properties that are going to be incredibly difficult to bring up to standard. We would want that cost cap to be as low as possible, not least because of all of the other things that we've been talking about that are pressing on landlords. So that's really our angle from this. We're not going to make the problem go away, and in some respects it's actually quite a sensible it's quite a sensible proposition to have more energy efficient homes. It's not something that you can easily argue against, but you have to, knowing the direction of travel, be quite clear about how realistic it is and deal with some of those exceptional things, because what you don't want to do, actually, you don't want to lose those properties from the private rented stock. We're already in the midst of a very problematic supply crisis, so we have to be a bit careful about what we wish for on this.
Yeah, definitely. Right. Thank you for that. I think there's more to follow, isn't there?
I think there is.
And so finally then, Ben, is there any further advice you would like to give to landlords at the moment?
I think I'm slightly more upbeat, I guess. I know the situation is incredibly difficult, and if you're caught up in our horrible sort of court system and all of that, then I totally feel for you. From the NRLA perspective, we know this is an area that's causing pain. It's very much on our radar, but I would urge you to stick with it. Get involved. If you're a member of the NRLA, write to your MP, tell them that you're suffering. One of the reasons we managed to get a few exemptions, not great exemptions, I accept, but we did get some exemptions to the bailiff enforcement rules, was because so many landlords wrote to their MPs and asked them to write to the Secretary of State. If you're an NRLA member, there's a write to your MP toolkit. You can very easily complete it, and I would absolutely urge you not to sit there and suffer in silence. Get in touch with us, write to your MP, get active. Because it won't have escaped your attention that tenants groups have got very, very active, and it's really, really important that we match up to that. No point ranting on Facebook. No one looks at it. Write to your MP, do something positive about it. If there's stuff that's bothering you, talk to us, talk to your MP. It's the best way to go about affecting change. Yeah, that's good advice. Well, thank you so very much, Ben, for joining me and answering all these questions. No problem.
I hope that those who are watching or watching later have really got some use out of this. I'm sure they will have, because it's been some really, really useful sort of discussions here. And obviously, if any landlords are not with the NRLA at the moment, then like Ben said, it's £75 to join.
£75, and if you look on Facebook, there's even a few discount codes as well, short of giving you the shirt off my back. So there you go.
That was wonderful, thank you. Well, yeah, that's money well spent, definitely. Okay, so hopefully we'll speak again soon, and thank you again, Ben.
And to you, Merry Christmas all.
Thank you, and you, bye bye.